Welcome back to Books in Focus podcast.
Today, we're really getting into something that feels like it's everywhere. Artificial intelligence. Not just the future stuff, but how it's hitting us right now.
Absolutely. And specifically, we're looking at OpenAI. How did they get so big so fast? And maybe more importantly, what's the hidden cost?
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're using Karen Hao's book, Empire of AI, Dreams and Nightmares in Sam Altman's OpenAI as our guide.
It's a really powerful book, not just about OpenAI, the company, but using it as a way to understand, the bigger picture, the societal impact of AI.
And Hale seems like the right person to tell this story. She followed OpenAI for years, right? Like 5 years.
Yeah, incredible access. She did a big profile back in 2019 for the book, hundreds of interviews, over 300, with maybe 260 people.
Wow.
Yeah, current folks, former execs at OpenAI, people from Microsoft, Google, the whole ecosystem. And she didn't just do phone calls, she did on-the-ground reporting, too.
To get what she called the visceral impacts.
Exactly. And her work seems super rigorous. Documented sources, cross-checking details, it feels solid.
So the story she tells, it's one of ambition, obviously, but also power. And these hidden costs you mentioned.
Precisely. It's not just about code and algorithms. It's about who controls this stuff, what resources it takes, and, the people affected along the way.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. How did this all start? OpenAI, 2015. Who was involved?
Well, you had some big names. Elon Musk, Sam Altman, Peter Thiel was another backer. A bunch of billionaires, really.
And the mission statement was pretty out there, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Develop AGI.
Artificial general intelligence, yeah. The most powerful AI imaginable. But here's the kicker. They said it wasn't for profit. It was for the benefit of humanity.
Huh. So a nonprofit initially.
Yep, started as a nonprofit. They pledged $1 billion, promised transparency, promised to share their research. The open in OpenAI was meant to signal that, a democratic approach.
That idealism didn't last long.
It seems not. Hal points out that as early as January 2016, just months after they launched Ilya Sutskever, their chief scientist, he apparently suggested they should start being less open as they got closer to AGI.
And Elon Musk's reaction.
How's that?
Wow. Yep. Tells you a lot, doesn't it?
It really does. And that foreshadowed a huge shift. Fast forward to April 2018.
What happened then?
They released a new charter. And this charter basically paved the way for them to become a capped profit company, OpenAI LP.
Capped profit. So still some limits, but definitely not a nonprofit anymore. What was the reason they gave?
The official line was needing substantial resources to stay on the cutting edge. The compute costs were getting insane. The money.
Always the money.
And this let them walk back that open source promise, too. Now it was about safety and security concerns.
Which Altman later spun as, well, the nonprofit just couldn't raise enough cash.
Pretty much. It highlights this core tension, right? The sheer cost of doing this kind of AI research pushes you away from pure idealism towards, needing serious capital, and that changes everything.
So who are the main players driving this? Altman, obviously.
Yeah, Sam Altman. The book portrays him as this master strategist, very charismatic, understands people, his goal, to write the rules for the world, basically.
Ambitious.
Hugely. Believed in centralizing everything, talent, money, resources to crack AGI and solve, disease, poverty, the big stuff.
The book also touches on some personal things, right? Allegations from his sister.
It does, yeah. Karen Hao dedicates significant space to detailing the long-standing allegations made by his sister Annie Altman. The book presents this as sort of a microcosm of broader societal themes, and it definitely complicates his public image as this purely benevolent tech leader.
Okay. And besides Altman?
Greg Brockman, the president, also a co-founder. He was key in pulling in top AI talent, really shaping the culture. He seemed convinced AGI was basically imminent, just around the corner, very focused.
And Ilya Sutskever, the chief scientist you mentioned earlier.
Right. He was the deep believer in the power of scale. Just throw massive amounts of compute at the problem.
Intelligence is compression. Was that his line?
That's the famous one, yeah. And later he said, look, once AGI gets unbelievably potent, open sourcing it just doesn't make sense anymore.
A complete reversal from the original open idea.
Totally. And then you had Elon Musk, remember. He was there at the start, worried about AI risks, wanting OpenAI to be the good guys.
But he left.
Yeah, he eventually left. Disagreements over the direction, especially the shift to for-profit.
And there were safety people, too, pushing back.
Definitely. Dario Amodei is a key figure here. He was a top safety researcher there, really pushing for more caution, more internal checks. He often clashed with Altman's push to go faster.
And he eventually left to start Anthropic, right?
Exactly. So you see these like fundamental disagreements baked in right from the start, competing visions for what AI should be and how to build it.
Okay, so that's the people and the philosophical shifts.
Yeah.
What about the actual tech? What made OpenAI's models take off?
A lot of it comes down to the transformer architecture. This was actually invented at Google, but Ilya Sutskever saw its potential really early on.
What was so special about the transformer?
It was just much, much better at understanding context and language, how words relate to each other, even across long sentences or paragraphs. And crucially, it was scalable. You could make the networks bigger and bigger, feed them more data, and they just kept getting better. Sutskever really championed it inside OpenAI.
And that led to the GPT models.
Directly, generative pre-trained transformer, GPT-1 came out in 2018, trained on, general English texts, didn't really make waves.
Okay.
But GPT-2 in 2019, that was different. Bigger model, much better at generating text, sometimes scarily good.
Scarily.
Well, it also showed some unexpected poor behavior, like it could suddenly start spouting conspiracy theories or even neo-Nazi stuff.
Yikes. So the safety alarm started ringing.
Loudly. And that's when OpenAI made that really controversial decision to not release the full GPT-2 model. They cited fears of misuse, like mass disinformation campaigns.
Was that seen as genuine caution or?
It was debated. Some researchers outside OpenAI called it a self-aggrandizing publicity stunt. But intended or not, it definitely changed the conversation around releasing powerful AI models. It set a new norm.
And then came the big one, GPT-3, 2020.
Huge leap, 175 billion parameters. Think of parameters as the sort of connections the AI learns, just a massive jump in complexity.
Which must have needed unbelievable amounts of computing power.
Exactly. And this is where those hidden costs really surface. Training GPT-3 used a supercomputer in Iowa.
Iowa, okay.
And it consumed something like 12,287 megawatt hours. The emissions were estimated to be twice what Google's comparable model at the time produced.
Wow, that's a serious environmental footprint.
It really is. And the data, where did it come from? Huge scrapes of the internet like the Common Crawl dataset, but also, controversially, places like Library Genesis.
Library Genesis, isn't that like a shadow library for pirated books?
Uh-huh. So massive copyright issues brewing right there, which predictably led to lawsuits later on.
And were there internal debates about releasing this monster?
Oh, yeah. Dario Modi's safety team especially had serious concerns. But the book suggests Altman pushed hard for a release, partly to deliver for Microsoft, who'd just invested $1 billion.
Ah, the Microsoft deal. That pressure.
And wanting to stay ahead of competitors, so they released it via an API, letting other developers build on top of it.
Then GPT-4 in 2023. Even bigger, even more capable.
Yep. Multimodal, so it could handle images too, not just text. Really impressive at coding, seemed almost human-like in understanding sometimes.
And the data sources for that one, even broader.
Seemingly, yeah. Things like GitHub code repositories, transcribed YouTube videos. The attitude described was basically, if it didn't have a clear warning not to scrape it, it was fair game.
Available for the taking.
That's the phrase used. It really shows the scale of data extraction involved.
So you have these massive models trained on basically the entire internet, warts and all. How did they try to make them less toxic? Less likely to say horrible things?
That's where RLHF comes in. Reinforcement learning from human feedback. It's a key technique.
How does that work?
You basically have humans rate the AI's outputs. Tell it this answer is good, this one is bad, this one is harmful. You also have them write examples of good answers. This helps fine-tune the model, make it follow instructions better, and reduce the harmful stuff.
But who are these humans?
That's the ghost work we touched on earlier. Thousands of contractors, often in the global south. The book highlights workers in Kenya, for example.
Paid very little, right?
Shockingly little, like under $2 an hour, sometimes up to maybe $3.74, for looking at potentially really disturbing content, violent, sexual, hateful stuff, day in, day out.
Well, the company's becoming worth billions.
Exactly. Haleo calls it data colonialism, extracting value from vulnerable populations with little compensation or regard for the psychological toll. It's a really dark side to making these models seem helpful and harmless.
And then, late 2022, everything changes with ChatGPT.
Right. Based on a tweaked GPT 3.5 model, made accessible through a simple chat interface, and it just exploded.
The growth numbers were insane, weren't they?
1 million users in 5 days.
Yeah.
100 million in 2 months. Fastest growing app in history at that point. Suddenly, OpenAI wasn't just an AI research lab, it was a household name.
But that must have put huge pressure on the company.
Extraordinary strain is how the book puts it. Suddenly, the whole world is watching, using their product, finding its flaws.
So all the scaling, the compute, the data scraping, the ghost work, this leads to Karen Hao's central idea, right? The empire's logic.
Exactly. She argues that this relentless drive for AGI, particularly the way OpenAI and similar companies pursue it, operates like an empire. It's about seizing and extracting resources, and not just data.
What other resources are being seized according to this logic?
Well, we just talked about labor. That ghost work is a prime example. Exploiting low-wage workers in places like Kenya, Venezuela, paying them almost nothing for incredibly difficult, sometimes traumatizing work. That's described explicitly as data colonialism.
Extracting value from people, just like colonial powers extracted raw materials.
That's the parallel she draws. And then there's the environmental cost we mentioned, the sheer energy needed for these data centers.
The GPT-3 training example was striking. 1,287 megawatt hours.
And it's not just energy, it's water too. Data centers need huge amounts of water for cooling. Hao points to future plans for AI megacampuses that could use as much energy as a city.
A whole city.
And the potential impact on water supplies in drought-prone areas like Chile or Uruguay, where Google and Microsoft have plans. It's potentially devastating for local communities. It really forces you to ask, is this progress worth that price?
And beyond labor and the environment, what about the models themselves, the outputs?
Because they're trained on the messy internet, they absorb all its biases. Racist, sexist, stereotypical garbage gets baked right in.
And can lead to genuinely harmful results.
Absolutely. The book gives examples like GPT-3 generating disturbing anecdotes about sexual abuse, or even text promoting the destruction of Ethiopia. When the training data is unfiltered, the output can be dangerous.
Which connects to another point, how it makes the lack of transparency, right?
Exactly. These companies are increasingly closing off their models, making them proprietary black boxes.
So researchers can't even study them properly.
It makes independent auditing incredibly difficult, almost impossible sometimes. Remember that Stanford study from 2023? It gave OpenAI, Google, all the big players, an F for transparency.
An F, that's damning.
It really is. And this lack of transparency fuels the hype cycle, too.
How so?
Well, the term artificial intelligence itself sounds so grand, right? It invites breathless exaggerations, as Hao puts it. Companies market their AI passing the bar exam.
Like GPT-4.
Right. Even though people inside OpenAI apparently knew ChatGPT was still incredibly limited. This hype makes the public overestimate the tech and maybe lets companies dodge responsibility for things like, say, copyright infringement or biased outputs.
Because it's intelligent, not just a complex pattern-matching machine trained on stolen data.
Kind of, yeah. It muddies the waters around accountability.
So these external costs and controversies, did they reflect tensions inside OpenAI as well?
Oh, absolutely. The book depicts OpenAI as this place filled with internal conflict, big ideological clashes. Mainly between the teams focused on pushing capabilities forward, the applied division, and the teams focused on safety. Altman himself apparently talked about different clans within the company.
Clans, like exploratory research, safety, and startup.
Something like that. Constant tension over how fast to commercialize, what safety guardrails were needed, who got resources. It sounds like a pressure cooker.
And that pressure eventually blew up spectacularly in November 2023. The blip.
Right. The sudden firing of Sam Altman by the board.
Which included Ilya Sutskever, the chief scientist.
And some independent directors.
Yep. Sutskever, Adam D'Angelo from Quora, Tasha McCauley, Helen Toner. Their stated reason was that Altman was not consistently candid in his communications. Very vague, very dramatic.
And what followed was just chaos.
Total chaos. 5 days of it. Most employees threatened to quit and follow Altman to Microsoft. Investors were furious. The pressure was immense.
And in the end,
Altman came back as CEO. Most of the board members who fired him were out. A major power shift.
but the drama didn't end there. The book talks about an omnicrisis.
Yeah, the fallout continued. During the firing chaos, rumors swirled about some big AI breakthrough called Q-Star, or Q.
Q, what was that supposed to be?
Details were sketchy, but the idea, apparently conceived by Sutskever, was maybe an algorithm that could improve AI models after training, using more compute at inference time when the AI is actually thinking, rather than needing more data up front, boosting reasoning or planning capabilities.
Interesting. But still just rumors. Mostly. But then other stuff came out that was very real, like OpenAI having these aggressive non-disparagement agreements for departing employees.
The ones threatening their vested equity, their
Yeah,
stock option.
exactly, threatening to take away potentially millions if they ever criticized OpenAI. Lifelong agreements. That caused a huge backlash when it became public.
Understandably. Doesn't exactly scream benefit of humanity.
Not really. And then not long after, the whole Scarlett Johansson voice thing happened.
Ah, yes, the Sky voice for GPT-4o. It sounded so much like her.
Eerily similar, and it turned out she had actually declined Altman's offer to voice ChatGPT previously.
And Altman tweeting her, referencing the movie where Johansson voices an AI that didn't help.
No, it fueled the fire. It became this big Johansson scandal, raising all sorts of questions about consent, AI voice cloning, and personality rights.
And amidst all this, the allegations from Altman's sister, Annie, gained more attention too.
Yes, the book details how her long-standing claims of abuse against Sam Altman and their family resurfaced and got wider traction in the wake of the board drama. It created this stark contrast between the public image and these private, serious allegations.
So, despite all this dominance, this empire, the book doesn't just leave it there, right? It talks about alternatives.
Right. It asks the fundamental question, how should we govern this incredibly powerful technology? Hao argues the real test of good AI isn't just what it can do, but how it affects power. Does it concentrate power or does it redistribute it?
That's a really useful lens. Does it concentrate or redistribute? So what are some examples of AI that aims to redistribute?
One really inspiring example is Te Hiku Media in New Zealand.
What do?
They're an indigenous Maori media organization. They used AI to help revitalize their language, Te Reo Maori, but they did it completely differently.
How so?
Based on Maori principles, consent, reciprocity, data sovereignty. They collected language data only with full community understanding and permission. They trained smaller, specialized models on their own hardware.
And they didn't just release the data.
No, they acted as stewards of it.
Yeah.
They showed you can build effective, valuable AI without scraping the entire internet, without massive scale, and while respecting community rights, it completely challenges the open AI model.
That's fascinating. Any other examples?
There's DARE, the Distributed AI Research Institute, founded by Timnit Gebru after she was pushed out of Google.
Right, Gebru is a major voice for ethical AI.
Exactly. DARE's goal is to support AI research that actually benefits communities often harmed or overlooked by mainstream AI. They let researchers stay embedded in their own contexts.
And they have that project with data workers.
Yeah, the data workers inquiry. They pay data annotators, the ghost workers, a proper researcher's salary to define their own research questions about their industry. It's about flipping the power dynamic, directly countering that data colonialism model.
So based on these alternatives and the critique of the empire, what does Hao suggest we actually do? How do we change course?
She lays out a kind of blueprint. 3 main pillars. First, redistribute knowledge. Fund independent research outside the big corporate labs. Support groups like DARE and Te Hiku. Empower journalists, civil society to investigate and report on AI's real-world impacts. Don't let the companies control the narrative.
Okay, redistribute knowledge. What else?
Second, redistribute resources. This is fundamental. Challenge the way funding, data, labor, and that crucial computing power are all being hoarded by just a few players.
Break up the concentration of power.
Exactly. And third, redistribute influence.
How do you do that?
Educate the public. Help people understand how AI actually works, what its limits are, who is building it, and what their agendas might be. Demystify it. Hale quotes Joseph Weizenbaum, an early AI critic, saying that understanding the inner workings makes the magic crumble away.
Take away the mystique, give people agency.
That's the idea. It's about enabling informed public debate and democratic control over this technology.
So Empire of AI really leaves you with a lot to think about. It sounds like a powerful look at a technology that's reshaping our world, asking us to really consider who benefits and who pays the price.
It absolutely does. It's a call for critical thinking.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener. We've talked about safety, bias, the environment, labor. But if you had to pick one principle, just one, beyond safety, that should guide AI development to make sure it truly benefits everyone, all of humanity, what would that principle be?
That's a tough one. Something to chew on.
Definitely something to think about.
That's all for this episode of Books in Focus. Join us next time as we explore. If you enjoy this episode, we'd love your support. Subscribe in our YouTube channel. See you soon.